Welcome to episode 235 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism exposes and analyzes the threat we face, promotes efforts to defend people targeted by the fascists, and most essentially, challenge, mobilize, and inspire the non-fascist majority of people living in the United States to engage in determined, defiant, collective action to defeat Trump and MAGA fascism. First, I want to thank our sustainers who make the show possible and those who joined our discussion on Trump's first 10 days and ways to refuse fascism. Join our community today for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/refusefascism. Thanks to those sharing the show, everyone who buys our merch to support and spread the show. See the show notes to get your sticker packs and beanies that are back. A special thank you to those who help the algorithms that help grow our audience by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts or their listening platform of choice. They boost the show so much. So after listening to today's episode, please share your thoughts to help others find this resource. In today's show, we'll be sharing some highlights from our Patron-only Zoom discussion on January 29th as we tackle Week 2 in Trump 2.0. This week, the Trump regime took major leaps in transforming the federal government, in advancing their attack on immigrants, in unrestrained white supremacy, in erasing legal protections for oppressed groups, and more. Some of these actions will take time to come to fruition, while the cruelty of others has already begun having immediate effects. Week 2 underscores that fascism has direction and momentum, dismantling agencies and purging dissenters, retribution against anyone who investigated or tried to hold him accountable for his January 6th coup attempt, demanding mass resignations and attempting to make the legislative branch irrelevant while seizing trillions away from basic services, doing all the things to maximize their ability to wield absolute power. Trump has no boundaries or self-restraint and has repeatedly stated his intent to act as he pleases, blatantly disregarding the laws or transforming them into bludgeons. He is now governing through increasingly sweeping and intrusive dictates. The regime has not gotten everything it has reached for, but to say they've suffered setbacks would be a stretch, and to claim the guardrails are holding would simply be delusional. That said, there have been meaningful instances of defiance that could feed into a larger fight to defeat this fascist program. One we must all take responsibility to urgently develop. Anyone claiming that people are overreacting should really be ashamed with the basic truth of immigrants pulling children out of school and trans women being forced into men's prisons. And anyone saying we can't just call everything he does fascist is missing the point that fascism is a package deal, a qualitative change in the form of rule, not just an insult to throw at people we don't like. One of the big picture stories this week was Trump's attempt to categorically freeze federal funding for government services. The first thing that needs to be said is that we've known that this is their goal. It is spelled out in detail in Project 2025. And even before that, from the fascists on the Supreme Court in their crusade against the quote-unquote administrative state. The notion entered wider public consciousness upon Steve Bannon's ascent to the White House in 2016. For quite some time, prominent Christian fascist preachers have made their case that community care should be left to the churches, only accessible by community members in high moral standing. More vanilla versions have been pursued by Republican and some Democrat politicians for decades, claiming that the role of government should be focused on military adventures and policing. This idea has been percolating for decades on the fluid margins of right-wing thought. And now they are ready to seize this moment to make their dreams come true. On the heels of successfully instituting a similar freeze on international aid, which we spoke about last week, which continues to have devastating effects, Trump's initial directive for a domestic federal funding freeze, issued this past Monday, January 27th, was huge in scope, but vague in detail, attempting to halt trillions of dollars of funding to programs as varied as basic utilities and public infrastructure to housing and transportation, from education to disaster relief to healthcare and more. Federal funds directed to individuals such as food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security were exempted at this time, but that did not prevent Medicaid portals from going down across the nation. In the face of massive confusion, legal challenges from Democratic state attorneys general and various nonprofits and public outcry, the directive was first clarified, then partially stayed by a judge, then rescinded. Then the White House spokesperson said it was, in fact, mainly still in effect, and then a federal judge halted implementation of the freeze. The White House has said that it is still planned. It is a good thing that this did not immediately go into effect. But let's be clear, this does not mean that the much vaunted guardrails of democracy are holding. The fact that Trump has not been able to carry out his entire agenda within 2 weeks of coming into office is not proof that everything is going to be fine. While commentators are seeing Trump's moves either as an idiotic overreach or as a strategic ploy to feel out the boundaries of his power or the obstacles he has to overcome, my sense is that Trump and his people thought this might actually work. And they assessed, seemingly accurately, that even if it failed, they would face no meaningful consequences for the attempt. And strategically speaking, the massive confusion created by moves like this serves the fascists in their attempt to burn the whole thing down. This should tell us a lot about where we are. These federal funding cuts are part and parcel of the whole fascist program. This is part of their program to remake the basic functions of government. And this week, we saw a lot of pieces of that puzzle coming together. The fascists are instituting a government-wide purge from multiple fronts, enacting Schedule F to strip civil servants of employee protections, instituting hiring freezes, offering so-called buyouts for federal employees to leave their posts, rescinding security clearances and personal security details for former officials that they despise, changing the missions at key agencies, and of course, suspending the staff of all DEIA programs. This massive attack is paired with the targeted firings of around upwards to 30 inspector generals, 60 U.S. aid directors, a significant number of federal prosecutors, including all who worked on prosecuting Trump's crimes, along with their counterparts at the FBI and officials at the Department of Justice. Some of these effective firings are officially quote-unquote suspensions, but that's just one more way for the regime to downplay the criminality here. Disciplinary investigations have cast an even wider net to search for anyone whose loyalty is in question in these and other agencies. And when I say loyalty, let's be clear. I'm talking about loyalty to Trump and the fascist regime. Trump also fired commissioners at the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission and a board member of the National Labor Relations Board. Many of these firings were illegal and have been challenged in court. But as we learned when Phyllis Fong, the Inspector General for the USDA, refused to recognize the illegal order and went back to work, all the enforcement mechanisms are squarely in the hands of MAGA. She was promptly escorted off premises by security. The 60 U.S. aid directors who were fired were accused of trying to circumvent Trump's edicts, which is righteous and something we need much more of, something which may not have much effect on its own, but can contribute to a much wider effective resistance. After these initial suspensions were issued, the Director of Employee and Labor Relations at USAID, Nick Gottlieb, directly disobeyed the orders to carry out this purge and made clear that there was no evidence of malfeasance by the directors. He called out DOGE and the State Department for these fascist machinations, and he was promptly added to the list of those put out of work. The extremity of Trump's program is a big part of the basis for the resistance needed, both politically and tactically. These acts of disobedience and defiance from government workers and former government workers must continue, as these attacks on agencies and services will only ramp up once Russell Vought, Trump's man in the Office of Management and Budget, is confirmed. One more piece of this puzzle is Elon Musk's semi-official Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, created to dismantle the basic administrative functions of the government and the social services they provide in order to remake the government as a streamlined machine of death and oppressive control. Two things need to be made clear in regards to DOGE. One, the president does not have the authority to create departments, yet Musk has been given an office on White House grounds and seemingly broad authority to interfere in vital government functions. This is a direct affront to the legislative branch and the notion of separation of powers. And two, this is not a Musk coup. His efforts are integral to the whole program, and at present are one piece of the MAGA puzzle. That may change, but this is where it stands today. DOGE was seemingly instrumental in firing the 60 USAID directors. And it also directly intervened at the Treasury Department when a top official prevented Musk's aides from illegally accessing the system Treasury officials used to disperse trillions of dollars in funds. The official was forced to resign. Trump's appointee to the Treasury Department proceeded to provide that access to DOGE. Musk's aides also reportedly locked out workers in the Office of Personnel Management from their secure computer systems. Meanwhile, DOGE is already taking credit for quote-unquote saving $1 billion of federal funds by shuttering DEI programs and suspending their personnel. The attempts to paint this as a Musk-driven coup fall in line with a seemingly widely held belief that what we are seeing is a free-for-all, a circus, a smattering of cruel policies, or a plot to just enrich some already very rich people. But no, what we're seeing in totality is an essential step in the process of transforming a capitalist imperialist constitutional republic into a nuclear-armed fascist state ready to remake the world to its liking. This relates to some of what was raised in our Patron-only Zoom discussion this past week with historian Paul Street. Here are some highlights. Arlen, since you raised your hands, you feel free to come off mute.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm just trying to get a read on where the fascist energy is and where the priorities are going to be. It wasn't on my 2025 fascist bingo card to see territorial expansion. That kind of surprised me. Yeah. But I think we know in terms of first they came for the communists, then they came for, it's going to, first they're coming for the trans people and they're coming for the undocumented. That seems pretty clear. What other things are you reading from this first 10 days, the first flurry of executive orders? What are the leading edges of this program where the most damage is going to be caused, where it's most important for people to focus their efforts?
I think it's a great question. What I want to do is take like 2 or 3 more comments and then we'll go through. Who else had their hand up? Clark?
Yes, I'm here. One of the things that struck me about the first 10 days is the extent to which we, I believe, actually are underestimating what they're going for. Some people were sort of surprised about Trump going after birthright citizenship when here's this one thing that is so clear in the Constitution. Why would he go for that one? And I think there is a motive to the madness that's important to understand. I actually think he wants to take it to court and lose. And the reason why he wants to lose is he's going to come back and say, this is why we have to amend the Constitution. There's a bunch of stuff in the Constitution that's problematic, that has held us back for a long time from what actually needs to be done to make America great again. And this question of birthright citizenship is the type of constitutional amendment that he feels he can actually win. For example, if he went after abortion and tried to make abortion illegal as a constitutional amendment, he probably couldn't win that one because you've got to get, 2/3 of Congress and 2/3 of the state. It's kind of onerous to get a constitutional amendment. But this question of birthright citizenship, I think that he thinks that he can take that one all the way and then just threaten the members of Congress and threaten the members of the state legislatures all over the country. If you don't pass this constitutional amendment and cut off this threat to the blood of America, then we're going to go after you and take you out in the next primary like we've done to all these other people. And the thing that's really scary in this is if he can actually get through a constitutional amendment, then the floodgates are open and he will go after more. And of course, the scariest one is there's a provision in the Constitution that most people forget about for actually calling a constitutional convention. And once you call a constitutional convention and it convenes, there's no limits, there's no guardrails, there's no nothing. He could do anything that he possibly wants to do. Now, I just wanted to bring up this question about we should not underestimate what they're going for and tend to think of what they're going for within the framework of what has always been and what it seems like on the surface. they are actually going for ultimately in something that's the equivalent of the Enabling Act that Hitler did to turn over full power to them in one way or another. So that's just one example, but probably people have some others too. But we cannot underestimate how far they are planning to take this.
Thanks, Clark. Paul, I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to Arlen's question of what are the fascists focused on in terms of what informs our response.
I think one of the really underestimated aspects, and this is consistent with what Clark was saying, is I think these pardons were really a big deal. And I think the pardoning of Rhodes and the pardoning of Theriault, this is a 22-year sentence for Rhodes and 18 for Theriault. These were high-level fascist paramilitaries. And I think Trump, and he was asked about this, he left it really quite open that he still wants to have actual fascist paramilitaries out there with AR-15s and training and equipment out there to enforce his rule. And that has not gone away. And that's going to continue to be a factor in political life of this country. I think another very underestimated aspect of what's going on here is, well, I think ecology is always underestimated. I think that this is not getting enough attention. This attempt to bring in Bobby Jr. and this other fellow, Bobby Jr. to head Health and Human Services, and this other character whose name I won't try to pronounce to head the National Institute of Health and the suspension of medical research is really ominous and very consistent with Chomsky's notion that these folks are literally out to kill us or kill millions of people. We are in the middle of a bird flu epidemic that has the prospect to go human to human. We have absolute anti-science lunatics being promoted for the top medical positions in the United States of America. This is a massive potential disaster. I wanted to respond to Clark too, and I think that that's absolutely right. I think we have tended to underestimate just how completely, thoroughly Fourth Reich this agenda really is. And, I see Trump going after the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship. I can get a sense of how he probably thinks he can do that. His very presence in office is an explicit repudiation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits anyone who participated in an insurrection from holding public office in this country. I think that the immunity decision back on July 1st, it deserves discussion in all of this. I think we're incredibly close to a Reichstag fire moment. We have had a Christian fascist Supreme Court that has actually said that a president is completely immune from criminal prosecution for anything he does in connection with his real or purported official duties. And I'm sure everyone here saw Sonia Sotomayor's horrified dissent to that decision, saying send out SEAL Team 6 and destroy your political appointments. I think that the Hegseth nomination is incredibly chilling and underestimated. This is an open Christian crusader fascist whose denomination is headed by a charismatic pastor who thinks women should be removed from public life and who thinks that slavery was a time of racial police in this country. He's chomping at the bit for Trump to declare an insurrection act against protest. And, on this constitutional amendment question, I have a lot of progressive friends who talk a lot about all these progressive ideas that are out there about a constitutional amendment. We have an archaic slave owner's constitution, which serves oligarchy and enables fascism, to be perfectly honest. I've written about it at length at Counterpunch and elsewhere. I always say to them, be careful. You want a constitutional convention? The far right is chomping at the bit for a constitutional convention. They don't think the slave owner's constitution, with its electoral college and its malapportioned Senate and its powerful Senate and its godlike Supreme Court and all of that, they don't think that's right-wing enough. They want what I think Clark is talking about, something, a Reichstag constitution. That's what they want. They want a Fourth Reich constitution.
Thanks, Paul. The attacks on immigrants are a linchpin and battering ram of the whole fascist program, and very much where the fascist energy is right now. Imagine being afraid to go to work, afraid to take your child to school, afraid to go to the hospital while your child's temperature gets higher and higher, afraid to buy groceries, afraid to go to church, afraid you will be hunted, rounded up, locked up, thrown out, back to the land from which you fled, afraid you will lose your child, your parents, your family, your community, your freedom, your life. Up at night afraid because there is no safe space, not anymore. Afraid that when you're just driving your car, riding the bus, trying to learn at school, as you get dialysis treatment in the hospital, as you pray in church, that you could be taken. Afraid every time you watch the news and see the regime talking about you and all the people born beyond these borders as criminals, simply for the crime of not being born here or having parents born elsewhere. Live stream raids staged as media events, modern day lynching picnics. That terror that I ask you to imagine is being felt by millions right now, those without documentation or legal status, and many with. This terror that traumatizes the already traumatized, that forces people to self-deport, possibly to their deaths, or go underground, becoming ever more vulnerable and isolated. That terror is a source of glee and celebration to the fascists in power. The Trump regime has launched an all-out, comprehensive program of genocidal ethnic cleansing of immigrants, leaps beyond what has come before, as awful as that was. More than 3,500 undocumented migrants have been arrested since Trump returned to the White House. Here are just some numbers from the past week. Just over 1,000 on Tuesday, 969 on Monday, and 1,179 on Sunday. This according to daily statistics published by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. But they have not done this without facing obstacles. Just listen to Border Czar Tom Homan.
Sanctuary cities are making it very difficult to arrest the criminals. For instance, Chicago, very well educated. They've been educated how to defy ICE, how to hide from ICE. And I've seen many pamphlets from many NGOs. Here's how you escape ICE from arresting you. Here's what you need to do. They call it Know Your Rights. I call it How to Escape Arrest. There's a warrant for your arrest, and they tell you how to hide from ICE. No, don't open your door. Don't answer questions.
This is a result of important defense efforts, wrenches in the gears of the mass deportation machine that we need to step all the way up and which needs to connect with a mission to defeat the whole fascist program, a program spearheaded by this anti-immigrant campaign. We see the seedlings of this movement in the students walking out in defiance of ICE activity in their area, like the students in San Jose and Irving, Texas, and the student protesters at Arizona State University who shut down the college Republicans' attempt to hold an event to organize students to report their classmates to ICE. We see it in the hundreds of students that gathered on Sproul Plaza at Berkeley against the raids and mass deportations, inspired by the hundreds more walking out in San Jose. We see it in the protests largely organized via social media, TikTok in particular, popping up across the country. Over 1,000 people in Dallas-Fort Worth and hundreds more in many other cities. And when you look at the country where these been popping up, it really is nationwide. It's been in National City in Las Vegas. I'm going to miss places, just letting y'all know. In Omaha, in Waco, Texas, in Oklahoma City, in St. Louis, in Lexington, Kentucky, in Chicago, in Albertville, Alabama, in Indianapolis, in West Phoenix, in Philadelphia, in Columbus, Ohio, in Atlanta, shutting down traffic, in Vero Beach, in Florida, in Santa Barbara, in Houston, in Olympia, Washington, in big cities like Los Angeles, and in smaller towns like Springdale, Arkansas. They've taken place in Kansas City, Missouri, in McAllen, Texas, and many, many more places. You also have teachers and school administrators blocking ICE from entering their schools and teacher unions meeting to discuss how they'll fight back to protect their kids. Overflowing Know Your Rights trainings and the formation of more patrol groups and networks tracking ICE activity. Here's a clip from one of those protests in National City, California, the type that needs to grow, spread, strengthen.
The colors red, white, and green have taken over Highland Avenue here in National City in protest to the increase of immigration and customs enforcement across the county. They tell me they want to turn their fear into action and make their voices heard.
A peaceful protest quickly growing in size. Highland Avenue being swarmed with people.
I see a lot of youth, which I'm happy to see here, that are out here supporting. I see a lot of families with kids. I see a lot of older people as well.
Most spreading their message proudly.
We're here to speak for the people who cannot speak, and we're here to stand up for the right.
Monday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp, the global symbol of genocide perpetuated by Nazi Germany, the ethnic cleansing of Jews in particular. Historians estimate that around 1.1 million people perished in Auschwitz during the less than 5 years of its existence. The mass industrial-scale murder was the culmination of a process that began with simple criminalization, with a campaign of mass deportation and mass detention, state-sanctioned violence against Jews and other so-called, quote-unquote, undesirables. fomenting a culture of bigotry, claiming that Jews, especially those foreign Jews, were, quote unquote, poisoning the blood of our country. On Wednesday, January 29th, Trump held a signing ceremony for the Laken-Riley Act, the most anti-immigrant legislation yet, which expedites mass deportation by stripping due process rights from millions of undocumented immigrants. At that ceremony, he announced,
"Today I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay." Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo.
Yes, only his second week in, and he is opening a concentration camp. This is a pivotal moment of escalation and a key plank of the fascist program. With 500 Marines being deployed to Gitmo and migrants being flown there for detention as early as this weekend, this effort expands mass detention, indefinite detention, and the criminalization of migration, while dispensing with due process for a whole section of people. It unleashes military force for immigration detention, forcibly caging 30,000 people in Gitmo, a symbol of war crimes and crimes against humanity, of torture, indefinite detention, a legal black hole where people have been systematically denied due process, has the clear goal of further terrorizing and demonizing migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. While there is history of migrant detention that predates the infamous Camp Delta prison that was used to detain people who were intercepted at sea, those kept there were subject to horrific conditions. But now, rounding people up from their homes and sending them to such a camp in a remote offshore location, a military base which earned its reputation as a global symbol of torture, that is a qualitative leap. It is blatantly illegal, violating constitutional rights which apply to all those living within these borders, and violating international laws, which, for starters, preclude the punitive detention of asylum seekers. Vincent Warren, executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights, which has long fought for the closure of Guantanamo, called the move a decision that, quote unquote, should horrify us all, saying, quote, "The order sends a clear message. Migrants and asylum seekers are being cast as the new terrorist threat, deserving to be discarded in an island prison, removed from legal and social services and support," end quote. This is how fascism advances, dehumanizing whole sections of people and normalizing cruelty, preparing hearts and minds to look away as atrocities worsen. Silence is complicity. Inaction is our consent. Democratic Party leadership will not lead us out of this. They are about maintaining order for their whole setup. For them, order is more important than justice, even if that order means the order of fascism. Was this not driven home yet again when they helped deliver the Laken-Riley Act? History has shown that appeasing and collaborating with fascism leads to ever greater horrors. If you pour your hopes into leaders like these, who are fine with dispensing of due process here, you become complicit with those crimes. That which we do not resist and mobilize to stop, we learn or are forced to accept. If we do not stop this, we are greenlighting concentration camps. We are greenlighting the advance of fascism. Mere hours after an Army Black Hawk helicopter crashed into a passenger jet, killing all 67 people on both aircrafts, Trump blamed diversity for the crash. He subsequently doubled down, including by taking particular focus on lies about people with disabilities, once again admitting he had no evidence to back up his immediate claims, and then went on to issue an official presidential memo to the same effect. Many mainstream commenters described his comments as rambling, controversial, or divisive. The Onion's take much more accurately reflected the reality, with the headline, quote, "Trump to victims' families, I'm doing everything possible to resegregate flight schools," end quote.
The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite.
The next day, Vance went on to make the argument that regardless of what goes wrong, diversity is the issue.
When you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there.
These repeated statements reflect two basic points about MAGA fascism. One, that their absolute disdain for anybody who is not a white Christian cis male lives at the heart of their worldview and politic, animating their drive against DEI and towards a segregationist and ultimately eliminationist program. And two, that such hatred is the only truth that matters, not the details of an accident that ended 67 lives in a flash, nor the history of centuries of brutal oppression, which DEI has nominally attempted to address. This is the most public face of a broad hate-fueled campaign that continued full steam into its second to strip any and all protections from oppressed peoples in the United States, a campaign encompassing an ever-widening array of government programs from education to the military to the Department of Transportation and more. So with education, the regime has signed an executive order titled Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling, to defund schools who dare to teach any truth about race, gender, history, or protect trans or non-binary students, accusing schools of indoctrination while simultaneously creating a deadline for implementing patriotic education, a curriculum of indoctrination. Not only are they banning teaching the truth, but they are insisting that schools must, quote, instill a patriotic admiration for our incredible nation and the values for which we stand, end quote. The same executive order mandates patriotic education, which they define in detail as, quote, a presentation of the history of America grounded in an accurate, honest, unifying, inspiring, and ennobling characterization of America's founding and foundational principles, a clear examination of how the United States has admirably grown closer to its noble principles throughout its history, the concept that commitment to America's aspirations is beneficial and justified, and the concept that celebration of America's greatness and history is proper, end quote. We will definitely be covering this more in a future episode. On Wednesday, DT implemented another core pillar of Project 2025's vision for education when he signed an executive order seeking to divert federal funds away from public schools and into private school vouchers and homeschooling. The DOE and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services have been directed to find the methods for this diversion, once again, sidestepping the pesky legislative branch. Trump is attempting to create a federal voucher system by diktat. For more on school vouchers, the anti-public school movement, which is a key plank, again, of Project 2025 and Trump's personal agenda, we recommend you listen to episode 218, uploaded September 22nd, our interview with Josh Cowan, author of The Privateers, linked in the show notes. Moving to the military, the regime has now ordered the military to root out any trans people in its ranks, ordered federal prisons to begin transferring trans women to men's prisons, and abruptly end their appropriate medical care, stopped federal funding for gender-affirming care for trans people under 19, and laid the basis for criminalizing such care wholesale. Agencies across the federal government have been taking down and rewriting enormous amounts of public information from their public websites to follow new language rules imposed by the regime, erasing mentions of everything from accessibility and diversity to climate change. The National Park Service has taken down pages for historic sites related to the internment of Japanese Americans and the Tuskegee Airmen and the Stonewall Uprising for gay rights. The State Department, Census Bureau, and Prison Bureau have been revising away trans existence. The CDC website, along with other federal public health sites, have seen massive erasures, with the CDC erasing its whole data repository with a notice that, quote, the website will resume operations once in compliance, end quote. Meanwhile, federal workers have been forced to erase their pronouns from their email signatures. Lastly, the Department of Transportation has joined the fray with an quote-unquote anti-woke memo directing funds toward communities with higher marriage and birth rates. Forget the fig leaf of merit that they are using to wreck any notion of justice for oppressed people. This is straight up great replacement theory in action. The order explicitly conflates population growth with economic growth. Both Musk and Vance have made clear that Americans having more babies is a strategy to overcome their fear of what the Nazis overrunning Musk's social media platform call quote unquote, white genocide. Trump has said that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. This is straight out of the Orban playbook, where the government incentivizes having more than 4 children explicitly to counter immigration and prevent Hungary from becoming a quote unquote mixed population country. Additionally, in the words of the Woke Rescission Memorandum, that is the official title, the Department of Transportation is to, quote, identify and eliminate all Biden-era programs, policies, activities, rules, and orders that promote climate change activism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives, racial equity, gender identity policies, environmental justice, and other partisan objectives, end quote. Lastly, they demand that all recipients of the Department of Transportation funds cooperate with ICE. On the Zoom discussion, people shared ideas for actions and how they are inspired by the podcast. Have a listen, starting with Joanne.
2 weeks ago when they had the People's March, I live in Michigan. We went to the one in Lansing. We have a group called Fascist Fighters, and we were doing postcards for like ever, and now we're delving into other things to try and stop this godforsaken flow. But 2 weeks ago when we went to the People's March, our group, there's 8 or 9 of us, and we made these no in the I think you guys can see it. I bought 100 of them, and then I couldn't buy them anymore, so we had to make them ourselves. So we made safety pins, and we put a blue ribbon on it, and then we also put that on there with this. Oh, and it's resistance. And everyone, there were 700 people there. We ran out. We were taking them off of ourselves, running back to our car to give these people that. And I just wanted to say a couple things. One is that next Wednesday, there's a thing online. It's called 50-50 One Day. And they want people to show up at the state capitals on February 5th in every state. So we're going, whether there's going to be a lot of people there or not, doesn't matter. We don't want Michigan to not be the 50th person. I'm letting you guys all know, come. We will be passing out these and maybe on safety pins. You know, it was really cold that day. They were putting them in their hats. I mean, everybody was screaming and cheering. It was quite incredible. So we had the stickers and we gave them to every young person that was excited. I mean, because I was going to give them out. Anybody said, oh, yeah, that's fine. I'll take a couple. I give them 1 or 2. But if someone would go, oh, my God, I'll put them everywhere. I gave them like 15, 20. Then I kept telling people, if you're not going to do it, please don't take it. It's okay. You know, we pay for this shit ourselves. I just want them out there. I don't care how they get out there. I want them out there. Now, next thing is we take these and we put them all over the place. We put them in menus. We put them in bathrooms. We put them on gas station things. We put them everywhere. I mean, every restaurant you walk into. And one of the ladies, and we're all going to be doing this now, she goes into libraries and restaurants and other places, you know, like she goes into Myers and she goes into the books and she puts them in the books. If only one person does it, I don't care. That one person is one more person that we need. We need to get the word out so hard and so fast that people understand. People are afraid to say fascism. I don't get it.
Deborah helps with the transcripts for the podcast. She helps with many, many things. So go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, number one, when somebody says to me, how you doing? I say, I'm living in a fascist country just like you are. What are we going to do about it? Sometimes it really opens things. This new sticker promotes the Refuse Fascism podcast. What can people do? Anywhere you are, you can promote the hell out of that podcast. There is no other venue like this where academics, artists, thinkers, activists, ministers, performers, comedians are talking with Sam on the podcast every week about these questions. The last thing I want to say is that people act on what they understand. This podcast is very important to help people understand things.
Nancy.
Just wanted to thank you and the Refuse Fascism podcast for leading in this. I just finished listening to parts of past episodes, and you had talked about we need to have not rearguard action, but go on the offensive in relentless collective action. And like Deborah has said, people act on what they understand. So I see this as a really dynamic venue. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Nancy. The 5051 protests taking place February 5th at state capitals that Joanne mentioned are being organized online via social media, particularly TikTok, I think, and Reddit. We encourage folks to join actions to bring the slogan, "In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America," to these protests. Local events are being posted on Reddit on the 5051 subreddit, or you can find information on Instagram, Blue Sky by following 5051 movement or searching hashtag 5051 on TikTok along with hashtag cute winter boots. You can get sticker packs that Deborah mentioned. Just see the link in the show notes. Fascism is here, rapidly consolidating, but not yet consolidated. The house is on fire, and our focus should be on getting people to safety, putting that fire out, cutting off its fuel, and containing it. But while we're trying to do just that, you have people like Jon Stewart complaining about how loud the alarm is, others yelling at you that there's not a fire as your face is scorched, folks like Shadi Hamid telling you it's not a big deal, it's always been on fire, or people telling you that there is no way to put out that fire and that you just have to let it burn. There are many ways this chill the F out, you're overreacting line takes shape. We see it in the Democratic Party, clinging to norms as they are set ablaze, accommodating, complying, appeasing, if not outright collaborating and facilitating. Senator Amy Klobuchar said, quote, "It is very clear that if there is a middle of all this hot mess of division, Americans want us to work together when we can and find common ground," end quote. But is the issue really just division when those that rule deem whole peoples subhuman? Common ground with mass deportation? Fuck no. Common ground with concentration camps? Fuck no. Common ground with science-denying Christian fascist bigotry seeking to erase trans people from public life and throw women back to the dark ages? Fuck no. Then there are people telling you Trump has already failed. Stop overreacting. But let's be clear. The fact that he hasn't accomplished his whole program in 12 days doesn't mean he won't be able to carry it out. It's not a cause for relaxation or celebration, but it is a cause to double down in organizing towards its defeat. When people accuse you of being hyperbolic or overreacting, ask them, what does it look like for a society to react appropriately when faced with a regime that is asserting absolute power and impunity? Where is the moving goalpost now? At what point do the horrors become intolerable? Does that only start when it comes for you? Politics as usual cannot contend with the reality of what we confront, a fascist regime. The crisis we face has deep roots, but no precedents. It is a danger we have never confronted, and it necessitates a response like nothing we have seen before. We've established that we are not seeing an overreaction. In fact, the response to the fascist program so far has been underwhelming on every front. What would an appropriate reaction to these last 2 weeks look like? It would include, yes, millions in the streets each day, ebbing and flowing, but seeing growth over time. It would mean whole infrastructures of resistance, with all kinds of organizations and communities providing resources to those disrupting business as usual. It would look like fascism promoting social media algorithms overwhelmed by every flavor of anti-Trump content. It would include politicians scrambling to confine and derail protest, and each day we would be seeing new expressions of defiance that we could not dream of the day before. This is what we must be acting towards today. Mass, relentless refusal. Mass, collective defiance with urgency and courage. Let's go. Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. Want to support the show? Spread the imperative and support the show by getting merch, including our Refuse Fascism beanies. See the show notes to get yours. Join our Patreon community to fuel refusal of this fascist nightmare. Join today at patreon.com/refusefascism. Share the show with others, rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, or comment on your socials or YouTube. It all makes a difference and is so appreciated. Connect with us on social media at Refuse Fascism, including on Blue Sky, and find me on TikTok at Sam Goldman RF. If you are interested in volunteering, we have many needs. We'd love to have you with us. Graphic design, research, copy editing, translation, writing letters to the editor, op-eds, or if you have other talents or connections, want to lend a hand to support Refuse Fascism, drop me a line. We want to hear all about it. You can reach me at Samantha Goldman at refusefascism.org. As always, thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tinkleman for helping produce this episode. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each show, so be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.